E3 is finally over, or at least all the conferences and Nintendo's live streaming thing, which they like to say isn't a conference because technically it isn't, but at the same time, it's pretty much the same thing because they like to announce things there and they get to curate it and stuff, and they kind of like to try and separate themselves from the competition. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but regardless, what is this video about? Basically, I ended up looking at all the footage and stuff like that from E3 that I possibly could, ended up looking at what everyone else is reporting, and I also looked at some of the interviews that have been coming afterwards. After these things, a lot of the news sites and stuff like that try and grab a few people from all these sort of different industries, and they try and, get their thoughts on things. And so I've been kind of analyzing a lot of that, and I think I've come to a lot of conclusions about stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and throw up what I think is relevant from the show, and we're going to go ahead and talk about it. Now, this year was mostly about game releases, as it mostly is every single year, but this year especially so. We only got about 4 announcements that were not game announcements that I actually feel relevant talking about, because there's a few more, but they were very small things like, we're going to add this to PS Plus now, and it's like, people are like, okay, cool, it's a free game next month, okay, and that sort of thing, and I'm not going to bother talking about that, but there are 4 different sort of key things I'm going to be talking about. But yeah, that is this kind of idea. I'm going to talk about a few game announcements that I'm kind of excited about, these interviews that have been coming afterwards, especially mostly talking about ones that have those sort of interviews coming afterwards, and then I'll also be talking about the conferences themselves, which I did not watch the entirety of the conferences because, quite frankly, I don't have the time for it, and so I'm kind of in a situation to where most people are, to where, hey, I didn't end up watching all of it, but hey, let's go ahead and talk about it. Michael here with another topic video. Now, first off, let's go ahead and talk about the structure of these conferences, because if you didn't watch the Electronic Entertainment Expo, which is E3, then you're probably wondering what the hell these conferences were all about, and basically they're giant advertisements. I did an entire video, I believe, that released yesterday. And so basically, if you want to hear my general thoughts on what E3 is and basically everything about that, you can end up checking out that video. But mostly this E3 was definitely all about game releases. We didn't actually get a lot of hardware or really any sort of software announcements outside of games. Now, one thing that was pretty cool is that the Microsoft conference actually announced a lot of games that were coming out this year or were going to be coming out early next year, which was actually fairly exciting, I think, because a lot of those are also coming to PC. We'll talk about those in a little bit when I end up getting to game releases. But there are 4 main topics that I actually want to bring up, and this is mostly where I'm going to spend the time in this video talking about. So there's 4 different sort of interesting things. I'm going to start with Microsoft. So there's the Xbox One X was announced, and so that was a big hardware reveal, which we already knew about it, and the specs were actually released in a Chinese conference a few days ago, which I didn't actually realize. And so when I was talking with a friend about it, he's like, yeah, they have the specs out, and I'm like, wait, really? So yeah, we actually have the specs. I don't know if they announced it at E3 or not. I didn't see it in their main announcement, but they also didn't post it on their E3 coverage, and so there we go. I don't know if they actually announced it there, but we do have it available. And then there was also the Microsoft sort of talking about backwards compatibility for the Xbox Originals coming to Xbox One, which will include the S and X version. And so that sounds really, really cool. And there was an interview that they ended up talking to Phil Spencer about from Eurogamer and others as well. He's been mentioning this to multiple, to where basically they're talking about bringing it to PC eventually, or at least that is the ultimate goal, which is actually super, super exciting. Then over, if we end up moving to Bethesda, they talked about the Bethesda. Sorry, I have a notes pad here. This is a lot to try and remember, so I actually have a script this time. Bethesda's Creative Club, or Creators Club, which sounds interesting. And then also, Microsoft announced that Minecraft will now be cross-platform. I think I just ran backwards because I was trying to read my notes. This is why I don't use a script, because I always end up running backwards in games and stuff like that. But regardless, I'm also playing Phantasy Star Universe in the background just because I needed a game to zone out to, and it's very easy to do that, but I will run the wrong way sometimes, so I apologize for that. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the Xbox One first, because that is actually a pretty big announcement, but at the same time, I'm not a console gamer, and I'm not somebody who's going to be buying a console anytime soon, unless it's a Switch, maybe. Talk about that later. So yeah, I don't really care about the Xbox One X. However, what I do care about is what this actually means, because both Microsoft and Sony have said this is their last console. And so they're like, yeah, we're done after this. And so basically they're on the PS4 Pro. They might have upgraded versions of it coming out. And then there's the Xbox One X, which is basically, yeah, it's the end of consoles. And Microsoft has been doing a lot of things to actually push towards PC. And this is actually really, really cool. And I actually have a huge theory about this. And everything that I've seen up to this point is kind of supporting this, especially when you look at Microsoft as a whole, not just in the console gaming space, but rather in every single aspect, as in their surfaces, as in their Windows Store, and in Windows 10 and the way they're kind of moving with it. I think that they're actually not trying to stay in the console race. They realize that the consoles are dying. The way that hardware is moving, the way the software is moving is not going to sustain within the console space. And yes, it will still always have a market because they have the marketing for it, but they're able to actually push beyond that. They have a huge presence in the PC market, and I believe that after the Xbox One X, which is mostly a transitional console, they can actually start moving into making micro PCs, and I think that's what they're going to start doing, because that's what they've been doing with tablet PCs. They've been releasing services, which is their very first sort of hardware in years. The last hardware I could think of was a small computer thing that they released back when I was a kid. I can't even remember what it was called, but basically it was, at least it might not even have been made by Microsoft, but it was promoted by Microsoft. And so they haven't even been promoting hardware for these amount of years. So it's actually fairly exciting to see this sort of thing. And I think they're actually going to go towards that route with this. But anyways, the Xbox One X, probably not worth the money in my opinion, because I'm not a console gamer. I'm mostly PC. And I think that even though the console is fairly more powerful, it's about 40%. A lot of people are saying more powerful than the Xbox One S, which is a fair significant amount. This is basically one of those things to where it's still a console. It's going to be limited by its power no matter what. However, it's also going to be held back by the other consoles because developers, it's all going to rely on what the developers actually put into it. And so while these specs are pretty decent for a console, and yes, it is the most powerful console that's going to be on the market, developers also have to take advantage of that. Now, Microsoft and Phil Spencer specifically have definitely said that this is a premium console. They're kind of going about it the route that they did with their sort of Xbox Elite controller, which we actually saw do fairly well, surprisingly. And so they realized there is a potential market for that premium product. And so, yes, there are definitely people that are going to want this Xbox One X. And, for PC gamers specifically, if they want frame rates that can actually sustain themselves, then yeah, they're definitely going to want this system, because most modern games on console these days is all going for that visual fidelity, and they don't run at good frame rates. And even Nintendo games have been kind of being sort of running at lower frame rates as well, which is very unfortunate, because Nintendo used to be a upholding standard to getting 60 FPS going, and recently they've been showing that they can't end up even doing that, which is very unfortunate. And so, yeah, you're going to want this Xbox One X if you want the console exclusives. Now, Microsoft did announce a bunch of console exclusives, but they also made sure that you knew that you could also play these on an Xbox One S, which they're basically calling their budget console. That is what they want you to end up buying. That's what they want the general consumer to be buying, and the Xbox One X is for that premium style gamer. And so, yeah, I don't think it's going to end up selling as well as the original Xbox, because it's not like a new console that has new exclusives or anything, and they're not releasing anything that is exclusive to it. Although we could easily see a future to where a developer releases something that is playable on the Xbox One X and uses all that hardware, but then they're like, yeah, you can play it on the older Xbox One, but it runs at like 15 FPS, Hello, Nintendo, guess what you did to the 3DS? Yeah, that. So, yeah, we've seen that happen before, and developers could easily end up doing that again. And so it's not one of those cases to where there's not necessarily going to be no exclusives, because there is that sort of viability of playing it. And I'm not going to play a game at 15 FPS. I'm sorry. I've moved on from that. But regardless, for the most part, they're like, yeah, this is a premium console. It's probably not worth the money in my personal opinion, but other people might have a completely different opinion. For $500, because it is $499 US, at least I don't remember exactly what it comes out to in euros or any other sort of currency, so you'll have to check your region for that. But for the most part, yeah, it's for $500, you could build a decent PC, and so I don't really necessarily see a lot of value in it for me specifically, because I'm not really interested in any console exclusives, and all the console exclusives that they talk about are more like, it's not on Sony, but it is on PC, and Microsoft has been kind of pushing towards that, which also supports the whole idea that they're going towards this whole multi-platform idea, and I'm really excited for them to start moving towards PC. Now, the other topic that I wanted to talk about from them, which one did I want to go to? GRM Shop, there we go. The other topic I want to talk about from Microsoft is the Xbox Original compatibility for Xbox One. Now, they're going to be bringing the Xbox Originals over to the Xbox One through emulation, essentially. And yes, they are straightforward. They're like, yes, this is emulation, which other consoles have done emulation before. Most of the time, however, it is actually done in a way to where it's mostly just, it's direct kind of hardware integration. And so you'll end up looking at like the PS3, for example, that was able to run PSX games. And that was actually through a hardware modification. That was not actually, like any sort of emulation. However, Microsoft is actually making an emulation for this, and the same thing they end up doing with the sort of Xbox 360 games that are coming to the Xbox One as well, to where they're like, yeah, we have an emulation set up for this. And no, it doesn't always work, and there's problems with it, but they're constantly updating and trying to make it better, which is fairly exciting. Now, Phil Spencer said in several interviews to where he wants to bring this to PC eventually. And this is really, really interesting. And this also supports the idea that Microsoft is trying to move away from consoles, which is kind of obvious. Nintendo's doing the same thing by moving into a handheld sort of market as well. But we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about Nintendo. But they're actually talking about doing emulation on these consoles. And Phil Spencer says, hey, emulation is complex, so we can get it working for specific hardware like the Xbox One. That's easy. It's getting it to work for everything because the PC space is so large and vast. And Microsoft has actually done a fairly decent job of supporting absolutely everything on there. And they're moving towards these sort of universal apps. And Phil Spencer mentioned this in his Eurogamer review, to where they're moving towards a situation, I should say, I think it was Eurogamer. Hopefully it was Eurogamer. I'm sorry if it's the wrong interview. Yeah, so I'll link that below, by the way. That Eurogamer one is mostly where I'm talking about the Phil Spencer stuff, because that was the one with the most in-depth stuff. And so anyways, yeah, we'll talk about it for a second. Yeah, so basically, they're talking about doing emulation with the universal apps. And so this basically means that everything that works with universal apps, because this is if you don't know how Windows works currently, especially in Windows 10, they have universal Windows apps, which work on everything Windows based. And this includes the Xbox. Now, they sort of have some weird sort of situation going on to where they don't support everything on everything yet. And so some mobile games won't work on PC and vice versa. And Xbox definitely has a lot of compatibility problems with the universal apps, and they haven't moved all of them over because basically they can't enforce compatibility yet. However, they are moving the platform in a direction to where it could end up working on everything. And so we can see a future to where this compatibility sort of, I guess, universal app situation to where everything works on anything Microsoft could end up pushing towards a situation to where they have live emulation that they curate and moderate, and they could potentially sell games for this emulation as well. And developers of old games can end up transporting their games onto the service. And we could see a future to where this emulation is actually on an official store. So you'd buy the emulation or download it for free because they'd sell you the games. And they would just sell you the games individually. And there you go. You have proper emulation done by a large company. And this is something I've been wanting for a very, very long time. Emulation is amazing, and I'm a proud supporter of emulation. Now, yes, there is some piracy concerns, and a lot of people download games illegally. When it comes to really old games, I don't really care, to be frank. Like, it's an old game, it's outside of its rights, whatever. Nobody cares if you download it. That's my opinion. Some people don't share it, but hey. But this is something I've been pushing for a long time, and I feel like it's something that Nintendo should have started doing a long time ago, because Nintendo has a lot of classics. Like, basically every single first-party game made by Nintendo is pretty much a classic at this point. And there's a few offshoot ones, but yeah. And it's something that I would really like to start seeing them do, because if they started an emulation, they just started selling games on, like, let's say PC, they would have a huge market for that. And it would be gorgeous, because while Microsoft, yes, they are going to be the first ones to end up kind of pushing towards this. I ran the wrong way again. Then that is going to be something that could end up pushing these other guys to end up doing it, because Xbox doesn't really have a lot of exclusives that can end up doing it. I guess they have like Gears and stuff like that, but that's already on PC now. I guess Gears 2 and 3 and the other one isn't, but whatever. They can end up doing some interesting things with it in the future, and it is exciting to actually have that sort of thing, because maybe there's some Xbox originals I ended up missing, because I did not have an original Xbox, and so there's a lot of things that I could just not end up seeing, that I could end up seeing through the simulation stuff. Now, obviously, it's far down the pipeline. We're not going to see it for quite a while, because it is one of those things to where it is a complex situation, and they also have to make it sure that it is marketably viable as well. They have to be like, hey, how many rights can we get to actually sell for this? Because if they make an emulation platform and they sell 3 games, then it's not going to interest anybody. And so, yeah, they have to make sure that people actually want it, and they have to make sure to have the backlog for it as well to have people actually want it. And that's the problem that most of these console developers are actually having right now, is the fact that the consoles don't have enough exclusives to sell the consoles, and so people aren't buying the consoles. But hey, consoles this year are actually selling really, really well, or this generation, I mean, are actually selling extremely well. And so anybody complaining about the consoles not having a big enough market, they're kind of lying. But I think the sort of stats for that are a little bit inflated, because we do have these additional consoles now. So they're like, oh, this many sold to this one, that's so many new users, when a lot of them already had one to begin with. I don't know a lot of people that are buying a brand new PS4 Pro without owning a PS3, or PS4. Which is unfortunate, I think, because a lot of people should be having those other ones. But that's off topic. Let's go ahead and move on to the other Microsoft sort of topic as well. Sorry, this has been heavy loaded with Microsoft stuff at the beginning, but this is where most of my interest comes into play, I would say, because the other ones were mostly about game releases, which I don't necessarily care 100% about. If you do want to hear about game releases, there are plenty of other people doing releases. There's huge lists about games that were announced at E3, and so you can end up looking at all that. I will talk about a little bit more later on that, but let's go ahead and go on to Microsoft wants Minecraft to be able to play on anything, and so they're basically rolling out in this fall. I don't remember the specific date. I think they gave one. I'm not 100% sure. But basically, they're making it so that Minecraft is now cross-platform completely. And this also supports my idea that Microsoft is sort of moving away from their whole walled garden idea, which I think is a good move because it's very, very smart and they can actually make a lot of money that way. And so, yeah, basically Minecraft will be cross-platform. So if you have, this doesn't include the original PC version of Minecraft. And so basically if you're running that version, which runs on Java and everything, that will not include you, I don't think. They might make some sort of changes, but this basically refers to the Windows 10 version. And so the Windows 10 version, iOS, if you're playing on the Nintendo Switch or anything like that, you will be able to play it together. And so basically they're going to have unified servers and everything. That's really, really freaking cool. And so basically you'll be able to cross-platform with people on console. Now, the exception to this is Sony. Sony's kind of being a butthole, as they always are with cross-platform things. Sony hates cross-platform, and they hate allowing other people to use their services. It even comes down to the fact that previous MMOs, and this is not E3 announcement related, but basically the Final Fantasy 14, is it? I think it's 14, yeah. The MMO, the newest MMO. Sorry, I almost got it confused with 15. That would have been a huge mistake. Final Fantasy 14 is losing support for the PS3, and that's unrelated, but for the most part, Sony actually wants money from these guys to actually run these MMOs, and there's been several MMOs in the past, such as the one I'm playing in the background, which this isn't the MMO version, this is the single player because the MMO is no longer alive, but basically, for example, SEGA had to pay Sony to actually have it on the PS2, and it actually led to the death of the PS2, in my opinion, or the PS2 service, in my opinion. So yeah, basically, Sony's kind of a jerk when it comes to multi-platform stuff. Now, they have released a public statement saying, oh, well, we can't curate it for the people that are children. It has a young audience, and we don't know what people will make in Minecraft. And the funny thing is that even Nintendo's on board with this. So come on, guys. Basically, you just don't want to share your platform with other people, and that's understandable. You've never allowed this sort of thing. You've never wanted cross-platform unless you specifically publish it. The only thing I can think of that actually has multi-platform was that first-person shooter they released quite a while ago for a PC as well, although the PC server shut down fairly quickly because it's Sony. They don't moderate their PC whatsoever. But basically, that was published by Sony, so they're like, sure, we'll do multi-plat. But for everyone else, no. They're kind of selfish with that. But regardless, Minecraft, multi-platform, and it is going to have multi-cross-play, which is super, super exciting. Now, I don't know if this is going to include the older versions of Android, because I know there's multiple Android versions that work on different phones and things like that. Obviously, we'll see when the update comes out. But for the most part, if you are on an up-to-date Minecraft version, you will have cross-platform play, which is super, super exciting. And I'm really curious how they're going to do that. I think it's going to start introducing things like Mojang accounts and stuff like that. I think everything runs on a Mojang account, so it'll probably run through that. And Microsoft now owns all of that software and hardware. And so, yeah, and it's also really interesting to see Microsoft being like, yeah, this thing's on Nintendo, we don't care. And this other thing is on this whatever. And yeah, and as I've been kind of talking about Microsoft a lot, obviously I think Microsoft kind of, as people love to say, they love to talk about who won E3. I think Microsoft won E3 just for the simple fact of not because of what they announced or what they released, because a lot of people are saying Ubisoft announced a lot of hard hitters and things like that, and that's fine. But for me, Microsoft has been showing that they're no longer being super competitive towards the other, console makers. And I think that is what is really, really interesting. I think in the long term, that is actually going to end up helping them a lot. And it's actually going to help out gamers a lot as well. It's ended up going to be very consumer friendly, even though it's going to earn them a lot of profit. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely for market reasons. But for the most part, this is actually going to be something that actually benefits all of us. And that's really, really exciting. And so for the most part, I actually think Microsoft had the best one, not because of the E3 conference or anything like that. In fact, I thought it was very, very boring for what I watched of it, which was about 20 minutes before I'm like, I'm just looking up an overview. But, for the most part, yeah, I think their kind of movement towards these other interviews that they've been talking about and things like that, especially Phil Spencer for what he's been saying. And yes, some of it is marketing, but a lot of it is genuine to where they're just not worried about competing. And this is why they didn't actually have a lot of heavy hitter game announcements either. Phil Spencer said in several interviews where they just wanted to show games. They wanted to show games that people were going to be able to play soon, specifically on the Xbox One X. And that's smart. They're like, hey, we don't care if we have these heavy hitters. That's fine. Sony and Nintendo can have those heavy hitters. We want to have those games that people are going to actually be able to play next year. And they're probably doing that because they've had several games that they've shown off and then they end up either underperforming or they have to cancel it, such as Scalebound, which I still hope ends up reviving itself eventually. But regardless, Scalebound ended up canceling itself, and they announced that at E3, I believe. I think it was E3. Maybe it was. I'm not 100% sure anymore. It was a while ago. But yeah, so that was a really exciting looking game, but at the same time, it had no direction. It was very confusing on what it was supposed to be. And so, yeah, I don't blame them for not wanting to show games that are in the pipeline. But they showed Sea of Thieves, which is coming out holiday season and stuff like that. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's talk about one more key topic, and then I'll move into the sort of game announcements that I'm really excited for. And that's going to be a much quicker discussion. And so anyways, let's talk about the Bethesda Creators Club, which they announced at E3. And they didn't give too much kind of details, but they did announce on their website and blog a lot more details after the announcement. And so basically it's a new platform for paid mods. And essentially it is going to be a new curated platform similar to their website, to where they have this sort of platform to where they're like, hey, you can upload any mod that you want, but it's going to be curated by Bethesda. And so the current systems are more user curated, or they're just on third-party websites, And there is one concern I have with this, and that is the fact that Bethesda may push out to end up stopping these other third-party services. But with the kind of popularity of these other services, I don't think that's actually going to be the case. I think that's going to be a very rare anomaly if they do. But it is kind of a concern that could potentially happen. I don't think it will, but it could. And some people are looking at it as that sort of thing. I don't think that's actually going to be the case. But Bethesda has actually said that they're going to be kind of curating this. So they're going to have a curated list of modders. Basically, it's going to be, they put up a mod if it's curated through their sort of scanning system or whatever the hell they're going to have. It's not released yet, so we don't know all the details. But basically, yeah, it's going to go through the scanning process. If it passes, they'll be like, yeah, sure, you can pay money for it. And that's basically how it's going to work. Now, you don't have to charge money if you put it on this platform. It is basically going to be a replacement that's going to be like, yeah, you can put anything on here if you want. If you want it to be free, go for it. And so, yeah, it's basically going to replace what they have currently, which is on their website that has the mod distribution, but it's going to be more curated, hopefully. And hopefully it ends up turning out well. I'm not against the idea of paid mods, but it has so many problems with it that I'm very, very concerned. Now, I think they're mostly setting this up for future games. I don't think it's one of those situations where they're like, we want all our games to end up working for this. Obviously, they're going to release it. Oh, I forgot the map is broken. I just got lost. And I don't know where I'm supposed to go, and I'm sure it's obvious to people watching, but to me, it is not. And so I guess I'm going to run this way and hope I'm going the right way. I'm probably just missing a path somewhere. But yeah, I'm not against the idea of paid mods. I think paid mods can work if they're done properly. But the thing is, when you actually have a platform that already has all these mods free, you end up running into people kind of losing support for the mods that they've already been playing. And I don't like the idea of something being free and then taking it away from people unless you give a nice head's notice. And so, yeah, and I don't really like it from modders specifically because you don't know the actual intent of what they're doing. This just ran into boxes, didn't it? Oh my God, did I literally just get lost in a complete loop? Oh my God, I am an idiot. Anyways, maybe this wasn't a good idea to play this game in the background. And so, yeah, you never know the intention of these specific modders. Now, modders deserve to be paid. There's the pathway. Modders deserve to be paid for their work. Doing a lot of kind of work and stuff like that. I know I see a lot of toxicity towards things like YouTube and things like that, but this is actually a lot of hard work. And what I'm doing right now required a lot of research and a lot of time. And when I go into editing this, it takes a lot of freaking time. And that's not something that should be overlooked. It's not something that can be like, oh, well, this person put in a lot of work. And one thing that was actually kind of interesting about a lot of the articles that I was reading about this, and, obviously we don't have a lot of details, but the kind of point that was brought up, especially on Gamasutra, they actually had a nice little kind of summary about it. Now, he was definitely biased towards paid mods, and so I do not recommend reading the article because he definitely didn't bring up the problems with it. But he actually made a good point in one of his core points that he was talking about, because he was talking about all the criticisms towards paid mods, and I disagree with him on over half of them. But regardless, as somebody who still also supports paid mods, it is kind of a situation to where the modders kind of get the terrible end of the deal in the current system, because modders will put in a ton of work for a mod, such as myself. I'll put in a ton of work for a single mod, and I get nothing for it. All I get is some minor recognition. Now, obviously, I'm able to push towards, be like, hey, by the way, guys, I also have a YouTube channel and a website, and I do graphic design, but that hasn't really pushed me any views. I think it's gotten me, maybe a few views on a video I linked in a random thread, but for the most part, nobody looks through that stuff. They're just there for the mod, and that's perfectly fine. But the thing is, well, I personally won't ever charge for a mod because I don't think that I make mods worth it. But if I ever did make something that was hugely content worthy, obviously that would be nice to have some compensation. And I definitely kind of promote the whole promotion, sorry, my throat is getting screwed up at this point because we've been talking for 25 minutes. I apologize. But I support the donation system because that is more of the system that I think kind of fits the platform a little bit better. However, the idea that these kind of modders don't benefit from these mods is kind of unfortunate because, yes, some of them are able to kind of cross-promote, but it definitely isn't the amount that people could end up having support for these modders. And so not necessarily forcing, but definitely having a paywall there in some sort of format would definitely help in a lot of these cases. And I'm not saying that every modder should end up having their mods cost money. I definitely disagree with that. I think it should be a few select, but those mods that are definitely worth paying for, there are mods that are basically giant expansions that, yes, people would definitely pay money for it, and I think those modders should get some sort of benefit from it. Should it be in the paid mod system? Probably not. I think that people should just be more willing to donate, or maybe there should be more pushes towards maybe Patreon for this sort of stuff. But for the most part, paid mods is a way to do it, and Bethesda definitely wants to cash in on that because basically from mods, Bethesda benefits from it because basically it pushes people to their platform because it ends up getting more sort of content to their game when they really put nothing into it. And so basically they get free publicity for nothing. And it also promotes the gamers to actually play these games more because they get to enjoy free content. So it helps them out as well. And it also helps out third-party sites as well because they get to advertise off of all of this. While the modder kind of just gets some nice cross-promotion and a few donations here and there, which is, yeah, not enough in my opinion. But hopefully this ends up going well because having paid mods would, well, maybe not the best scenario. And I think that it would be nicer if the kind of culture changed to where we ended up donating a lot more towards these modders that made great mods. It's still a step in a sort of right direction as long as they perform it in the right way. Now, if they release a bunch of mods on there that are curated that end up having a bunch of compatibility problems and everything completely breaks, they have a bunch of copyright problems, or they end up having modders using other modders' work without permission and things like that, it's going to become a complete shit show, and nobody is going to like it. And chances are that's going to happen. I am kind of thinking that's going to happen, but I am very hopeful that it ends up not happening. And Bethesda did their research after their last debacle on Steam with that whole situation. So yeah, that's kind of the 4 main topics that I wanted to talk about, and we're at 30 minutes now, so that was a nice little discussion. So let's go ahead and talk about some games that I'm more excited about. Oh, also, I forgot in my notes here, the Minecraft cross-platform thing, they're also moving towards trying to get DLC to work on all versions as well. That I don't know if that'll be implemented right away, but that is a topic bit that I accidentally skipped over. But basically, if you buy DLC on one platform, they're trying to make it so that you will also have it on another platform, which once again plays into the whole fact of why Sony wouldn't want it, because they want money for everything that's DLC worthy. And so, yeah, they're like, oh, we can't get money from that DLC, so we don't want it. And yeah, we'll see how it works. They're probably going to end up having it eventually because they're going to be like, oh, maybe it's profitable, but maybe not. I don't know. We'll see in the future. I hope they end up doing it because Sony's going to have to start kind of pulling their own pride under the water because it's going to hurt them in the long run, especially with how Microsoft's going, because Microsoft is really their only competition at the moment. And if Microsoft moves towards PC and starts getting console gamers into the PC market space, they own space in that PC market space because PC gamers means money for Microsoft. And it doesn't mean money for Sony, and so that's going to be a big push. But regardless, let's go ahead and talk about some releases that I'm really, really excited for. So I'm going to go ahead and start crossing these off so I don't end up repeating myself. So hold on one second. Go ahead and cross that off. Yes, I actually have a script. Shut up. I know. I don't normally do a script for this sort of stuff, and everything I've been saying isn't scripted. But, yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about Beyond Good and Evil 2. So this was announced at the Ubisoft thing. Now, Ubisoft has been very hidden about their whole idea of, we have Beyond Good and Evil. It's like, the guys that are making it are like, yeah, we have it. We're totally working on it. It won't be announced, officially until we can actually know we can make it. And there's an interview that I ended up reading from Ancel. I hope that's how I say it. I'm going to hate myself if it's not, because, you know, he's an amazing guy. He does some great design work, and I'm really, really excited for this game. But, you know, they ended up basically being like, hey, you know, it's coming out finally, because Ubisoft, a lot of the reps are like, it doesn't exist, because basically they want the developers to be able to actually promote what they can actually develop. And so, yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of heart that has gone into this project. The original project for Beyond Good and Evil, which if you haven't played the original Beyond Good and Evil, it's held up okay. The world for its time was absolutely massive. It had a really interesting world, a lot of interesting characters that were inside of it. But for its time, you know, while it was amazing, it hasn't held up 100%. The world is really, really tiny compared to today's games, but they really wanted that world to be huge. And they said originally that they wanted that to be an open world game. And so, yeah, it was sort of open world, but it kind of ended up getting locked down. It had a bunch of loading screens, but now they're actually saying that this new Beyond Good and Evil 2 is actually going to be kind of open world, and it's going to be a giant space world, and there's going to be no loading screens, which there'll be a few, of course, because there's going to have to be somewhere. You can't just have a game not load unless you have dynamic loading, which is going to run into pop-in issues or transition screens, which I would actually love games to just move to transition screens, because I think it could be really, really cool, especially for open world games. Like, imagine the game in the background, whenever I end up going to a new area, instead of having a loading screen, there would just be a door and then another door, and it does some weird transporting thingy, and then all of a sudden you're in the new area. I think that sort of transition is always really, really nice. And there's a few games that have tried it, but they still have loading screens here and there, which is a little bit annoying. But regardless, the trailer was kind of chaotic, and it was refreshing. Every other trailer I ended up looking at, even from Nintendo, for a ridiculous reason, was very, very serious. The only one that wasn't serious besides that one was actually the Mario one. I'll talk about it a little bit later. But yeah, so this trailer was kind of a monkey sitting down at a table with this kind of big giant pig guy, and they're trading some things like, aha, it was actually chocolate, and he gets some data disc that has information on it about a new location or something like that. And it's kind of edgy and things like that, and a lot of people were being like, oh, a 12-year-old must have wrote this, because they curse a lot and stuff like that. You know, I actually found it kind of nice and refreshing because it wasn't serious. It was all kind of playful, and a lot of people love to forget that Beyond Good and Evil 1, the first one, was actually very playful in a lot of things that it did, and it had a lot of comedy in it. And yes, it had a serious undertone, and the trailer definitely shows that near the end. And it actually shows off, you know, hey, this is a prequel, by the way, and it shows where they were with the whole crew and everything like that they end up talking about in the first game. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really, really cool. And so, yeah, it's gonna be a game. Like, that's basically what the trailer said. And obviously, the trailer didn't show any gameplay, but it showed the world. And that's what I'm interested in. It showed, like, hey, there's going to be a spaceship. And in this Ancel, really, once again, I hope that's how you say it. And this Ancel review that I ended up looking at was actually fairly interesting because he said, you know, it's going to be open. And I think it was on PCGamer, by the way. I'll try and link these interviews below, by the way, if I can end up refining them. There's a bunch of stuff buried underneath the E3 stuff, and so I might not be able to find some of it, but I'm going to try, at least. So if you want to read these interviews, they will be there. But regardless, yeah, so basically, he's like, in this interview, he's like, yeah, we wanted a giant open world, and so that's what we're going to deliver. We didn't want to announce it, like, officially until we could deliver on that, and now we believe we can deliver on that. So basically, it's going to be a giant open world space game, and so it's really, really exciting, especially with the kind of world that they built in Beyond Good and Evil 1, and I have a feeling it's also going to have some great story elements, just like the first game did. Obviously, could be wrong. Game could be terrible. We can end up having one of these situations to where nobody ends up liking it, and that's perfectly possible. Every game could come out and be absolutely terrible, so obviously don't pre-order. But at the same time, this is a project I'm really, really excited about because it's a game that's being held back not because they want to hold it back, but because it has to be held back. They're like, hey, we can't deliver on our vision until, you know, this sort of advancement in technology happens. And so, yeah, I'm really, really excited to see where this new technology actually brings this franchise because I'm super stoked for it. I really want to see where this goes, and I'm really, really excited for it. I've been waiting for this game for years, and I've been looking at it, and it's probably one of the very few bits of hype I'm ever going to have for a game like this, because most of my hype has ended up dying for a lot of games, and you'll end up seeing that, especially when I end up talking about these other titles, because Beyond Good and Evil 2, the trailer was fantastic just because it was so different than the rest of them. Everything else was like super serious and being like, this is it. It's like, and this one was just fun, playful, had a lot of cursing, sure, but it was playful cursing. And it was like, yeah, we're trying to set a mood that's not serious whatsoever. And it is a game that is going to be a game. And I'm really, really excited for that mentality overall, because that's how trailers used to get me excited, especially as a kid. And over the last few years, we've been seeing everything come out super serious. It doesn't even matter how the game looks. It's just everything ends up looking out super, super serious. I remember ever since Call of Duty did it, everyone's like, everyone has to do that too, because basically graphics got good enough to look realistic, or at least what people thought was realistic. And so everyone pushed towards that realistic look. And we're finally in a situation where developers are like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to move towards fun things. And this is something that the indie scene ended up picking up on. And that's why indie games have been really, really popular lately, even the crappy ones, which is unfortunate. But now AAA publishers are being like, hey, and Ubisoft actually does a lot of good stuff in this too. They kind of released the Rayman games as well, but that's a little bit off topic. They're actually really, really good publisher, while they're also kind of a sucky publisher. It's hilarious. I have a love-hate relationship with Ubisoft because they make some great games, but they also do some really shitty business practices, and they publish some broken games. And they killed Assassin's Creed, which makes me very upset. But regardless, let's go ahead and talk about another one. They also released an announcement for a new Pirates game, which actually looks fairly interesting, which is definitely going to be a competitor to Sea of Thieves. But basically, it's kind of based off of the idea. I watched their whole video that they had on it. I don't know if it showed at E3 or not. But basically what it was basically the sort of, Assassin's Creed 4, right? Was Black Flag. And they had the pirate ships. So basically, they said they played around with multiplayer on that, and they're like, that was incredible. Let's actually make this into a full game. And so basically, they're making it so it's pirates. It has a lot of physics into it and stuff like that. We don't know much about the game, but basically, you're going to be pirates, and it's going to be multiplayer, and there's going to be a bunch of ships. And apparently, it might be an MMO. And so, yeah, we don't know if it's going to be instance-based or actually like a full open-world MMO. If it's an open-world pirate MMO, that's going to be great because I definitely want to see one of those. But for the most part, we don't know much about the game. It's just something to note because pirates are in theme right now, apparently. So there you go. Ori and the Blind Forest, the sequel has been announced. Basically, they showed a trailer that's like, we're going to try and be emotional. Artwork looks beautiful. That's all I can say about it. It has showed nothing about gameplay. Now, I've mentioned in the past that I really want an Ori and the Blind Forest sequel or some other game that is by those guys that's actually really, really good because Ori and the Blind Forest, one of my most favorite platformers ever made. I keep hitting no. Whoops. And so, yeah, I really want to see more content for that game because it's just fantastic and I love it. And I actually have a review of it if you want to end up checking that out. I have a review of the definitive edition, and it's a fantastic game. It's great in every single aspect that it is. It does have some minor problems, especially when you end up going into backtracking and collectibles. But for the most part, it was fantastic. And I'm wondering if they're actually going to learn from those mistakes and be like, oh, okay, well, how can we improve this for the next game? And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see what they end up doing with that. And yeah, once again, great designers on that team, great artists on that team, and I'm really, really excited to see what they end up putting out. But we know nothing about it, and so I'm kind of skeptical, as always. It's hard to get hyped for these sort of things when we literally know nothing about it. And so, yeah, stop talking about that one. What's another one? Shadow of the Colossus remaster. So basically, or rather remake, not remaster. Sorry, my mic cord was covering the name of what I wrote there. But basically, yeah, they're actually remaking Shadow of the Colossus, which is interesting. I haven't played through the entirety of Shadow Colossus. So basically, I didn't own a PS2 personally, and so basically I had to play it on other people's. And so, yeah, I never got to the game, but it was actually a really cool concept, and they've actually had a lot of success with the kind of re-releases of it. They did the HD re-release, and so basically they're going to remake it. And so I don't know how the remake's going to be. Most likely they're going to botch it in somehow because it's Sony, but at the same time, it could end up being good. And I kind of like the idea that they're going back to these old ideas. Now, what I would like to see is them take that idea of Shadow of the Colossus and make a sequel and actually make a new game out of that same concept and make a new world and new bosses and everything like that. But still revisiting it and remaking it, not a bad idea. Not terrible, especially for people that end up never playing it. So, yeah, maybe at this point, by the time that releases as well, they'll end up being on the PC platform because by then consoles will probably be dead. So we'll see, because it's probably a long ways off. They didn't actually announce a release date, but they said in the next few years. So we'll see when that ends up coming about. Also, the Forza Summon. Sorry, I was reading Samus because I have my notes. They're completely jumbled. But Forza 7 is coming to PC. So that we already knew that was happening because Forza Horizon already showed up and Microsoft's movement towards getting everything on PC has been in effect for quite a while now. And so that's going to be one thing that's coming to it. And I'm actually really, really excited for it. Their footage of it was mostly just showing off the tracks and a few cars. And I'm like, cool. Shows no gameplay. I mean, it showed cars driving, and I'm sure that's the gameplay. But Forza games have always been good. A lot of people that have been following the series on Xbox are very upset. They're like, oh, I want the series to be just kind of put on break. But for us on PC that haven't had the series, no, let 7 come out, then they can take a break because I really want to see the series back. Because the last one I played was 4, and I played it for about a week, and that's when I actually built my PC and moved away from it because it was a gift. And, you know, my family knew that I loved Forza. Even though I'm not huge in cars, I love the Forza games because they're just fun to play. They're fun simulation games, and they have a nice career mode and everything. And that's why I didn't end up picking up Horizon either. And so, yeah, because like it's an arcade version of that. And that's not what I enjoyed about it. It's probably the best simulation racing game available. And there's some people that would argue that there's some better ones on PC, but it's the best one with a career mode. And I like the direction they've gone with it. And they always push towards a level of polish I really enjoy. Now, one thing I'm not going to enjoy about it is the amount of DLC that's going to release for that game. Because we know, because of the way not only their development cycles work, but also because of the way that car manufacturers work, they're going to have to license out all these cars individually, and so we're going to see DLC along the line for a very long time, and so that's going to be a little bit upsetting. So I'll probably just end up sticking with the base game. I won't really push myself forward, but yeah, that's going to be really exciting. Obviously, Windows 10 exclusive. You should expect that from Microsoft by this point, but you can end up seeing it on Steam in a future date eventually. What's another game they end up releasing? Sonic Forces trailer. So another trailer came out. I was actually going to do a dedicated video on their last trailer, but I ended up not doing it because I'm like, I don't want to get into a little controversy, because right now everyone's like, oh, fanfics come to life, because in Sonic Forces, if you didn't know, you can actually create your own custom character. Now, in the new trailer, they actually showed the villains at the end, but the main point that I like was the fact that they actually showed more polished levels. Everything that we've seen up to this point has been alpha footage. This one did not have alpha footage tagged on it, and that makes me think that those were actual levels, and they actually looked really good. They looked really, really fun and creative as well. The original alpha footage looked like terrible. It looked like little cut pieces from Generations and some weird cobbled together stones that they ended up having up, like a level creator was just put together, which actually made me somewhat skeptical, like maybe they'll have a level creator, but since they haven't announced it at this point, I doubt that's going to be a thing. They could end up implementing it, but it could end up being a feature that ended up getting cut. I don't know. We'll end up seeing that in the future, but regardless, they end up showing off a little bit more about the customization, just a small little clip. They showed off some new bits. I think it was actually bits from the last trailer, and so that's not really helpful, but the new levels look great. And so basically they're saying you can play as 3 different characters: the Sonic, and then Classic Sonic, which is basically modern Sonic, classic Sonic, just like Generations. And then they also have you, or whatever your custom created character is. Basically, they didn't say you, they said your custom created character. They realized that it's not you, it's a custom created character, which is kind of nice. I like that they're not doing the whole it's you thing, because it's not me, it's a furry little animal with things put on it. But regardless, I'm actually excited for that, because basically what it's going to end up running down to, at least in my sort of perspective, is it's going to run down to 3 different types of gameplay, at least from what it seems. And so it seems like instead of doing like the whole different Sonic characters things like they did in Adventure, which I would so love to see again, but I understand why they're not doing it for this title. They kind of want to run into the whole customization idea, and that's the whole kind of gist, or it's the whole gimmick for this game specifically. But they're basically going to have 3 different types of gameplay. It's going to be, I ran the wrong way again. They're going to have basically modern Sonic, which is what we would expect. They're going to have the classic Sonic, which is going to be the more focused primarily on the 2D type of stuff. They might introduce some 3D things again, like the whole rotating camera thing and stuff like that, which is really, really cool. I loved when they ended up doing that in Generations. They didn't do it enough, in my opinion. And then we could also end up seeing a gadget-style gameplay, which is going to add in the sort of gimmicky gameplay, which that's what I'm excited about, because in the previous Sonic games, especially things like Colors and Generations, they sort of ham-fisted in the gimmicky stuff on us, and I'm like, I don't care. I don't like that. Having it as a separate character, sure, I'm fine with that. I was fine with Unleashed because they kind of locked it around a whole new character and the entire gameplay was completely different. But trying to mesh it into the kind of old style gameplay just completely broke the loop for me in Sonic Colors. And that's why I don't really enjoy Colors that much. Even though the action stages and stuff like that were really, really fun, it was still one of those situations to where the gimmicky style that ended up running into almost every single level after the first area was very upsetting to me. And I never ended up finishing the game for it because of it. And so I might finish it eventually if I ever pull out my Wii again, but yeah, so I'm excited that it's going to be a new character because it seems like they're going to end up focusing around it. They showed off a few gadgets like a whip and things like that, and so that's going to be cool. I think it's kind of a cool idea, and it's going to allow them to be a little bit more creative, which is always an exciting deal. What's another one? Okay, so basically now we can talk about Bloodstained, because Bloodstained got a new trailer. This was actually the very beginning of E3, I believe. I think it was at the very beginning. Either I was beginning of Microsoft's conference. I'm not sure. Anyways, they released a new trailer for the E3 stuff, and it's more kind of what we're currently developing sort of footage. And so basically it shows a new area. It shows a kind of nostalgic sort of church area, which has bells and things like that. And the main point here is actually the gameplay that was shown off. A lot of people have been saying it looks slower, and I mentioned this in my last E3 video, which I did yesterday or whatever, or I think it released yesterday. Not 100% sure because I recorded that video and then waited a day to release it, so I don't necessarily know 100% what it actually contains. But regardless, yeah, so the combat looks a little bit slower, and people were mentioning that, and I think that mostly comes down to the animations. It actually looks the perfect speed to the Symphony of the Night and Soma kind of Castlevania games. Looks a little bit slower than the Order of Ecclesia games, or Order of Ecclesia, which is my favorite Castlevania so far. And so, yeah, it's a little bit on the slower side, but at the same time, that's kind of what they were going for. They said this is Symphony of the Night, not, Castlevania, Order of Ecclesia, or Portrait of Ruin. And so, yeah, I'm actually really, really excited for it. It looks good. Obviously, the animations are a little bit awkward because it's in 3D now. I'm not 100% a fan of the artwork, but I also understand because they're with a new studio, it's new people working on it, and they kind of want to push things forward. And, if they end up developing this for long enough, that art style is going to look amazing in 3D. And so, yeah, animations look a little bit weird, but every single trailer they've released has been in development footage, and they said that with this one as well. It's like in development footage, and so, yeah, it could end up looking amazing in the future, and it could be one of the best looking 2D games that's ever made. But at the same time, I doubt that's going to happen. I have a feeling it's going to be a decent game. I'm not expecting anything like mind-boggling. I don't think it's going to be an instantaneous classic, but it's going to be a nice callback into a genre that doesn't have a lot of games anymore. Metroidvania, the classic Metroidvania style, has been introducing in other games, but that whole Castlevania aspect has been drawn out a lot of times. And so, yeah, I'm excited for that. I'm really, really excited for it. So once it comes out, I'll be definitely playing it. So hopefully it ends up being good. Now let's go ahead and talk about Nintendo for a little bit. So they announced a lot of games for the Switch, and that's basically all they did. They didn't really talk about anything about the Switch specifically aside from releases. They're like, these games are going to be coming to the Switch. So basically Mario Odyssey, or whatever it's called. I think it's Mario Odyssey, or it's a Super Mario Odyssey. I don't know if they're doing the whole Super thing anymore. That just might be Mario Odyssey. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a big Nintendo fan, which you probably noticed by me waiting so long to talk about it. But yeah, so basically, Mario Odyssey looks very strange. Apparently, it has a hat mechanic to where you can take over things. And so they ended up showing off a trailer in their whole live stream thing. And it shows Mario for like 20 minutes just running around, throwing his hat on things and becoming them. And so it seems like they're introducing the whole 3D world thing. And so that's actually really cool. I'm tired of the 2D Marios. I really like the 3D Marios. Those are the ones I think have more creativity in them and are more interesting. But I also am kind of bored of Mario in general, and I think that hat mechanic is actually really, really cool. Being able to throw your hat on enemies and taking them over and using it for puzzle elements is actually going to be a nice kind of twist. There's other games that have kind of played with this topic, or played with this concept as well. And so those have been in 2D, but that entire idea, bring it into the Mario universe, could be really, really interesting. But it could also void the game of any challenge. But at the same time, Mario, aside from like Super Mario Sunshine, hasn't really been challenging for a very long time. And so, yeah, and Super Mario Sunshine was only challenging if you tried to get every single star. Aside from that, it was actually a fairly easy game to get through. You could get the minimal amount of stars very easily, literally just by walking around and just grabbing them. And so, yeah, I don't know. Mario's never been challenging enough for me. That's why I ended up liking the Sonic series. And Sonic's not really that challenging either, but at least it's fast-paced. It keeps me engaged. And I like that they end up doing new things. And so seeing Mario do new things, that's exciting. And then what else did they announce? Oh yeah, they announced the new full Pokemon is coming to the Switch, but not this year. It'll be coming out in about a year and a half, Game Freak says. I really want Nintendo to lose the Pokemon franchise because it's a franchise I would actually play the living hell out of if it was on anything besides Nintendo, quite frankly. So yeah, I haven't bought into, Pokemon for a really long time. I don't even have the one for the 3DS, Sun and Moon. Don't have it. I wanted it, but I never picked it up, and I should have, but whatever. I'll probably end up getting one on the Switch if the Switch ends up coming out. And this is actually the thing that will push me to get a Switch. If they actually have a good Pokemon game that releases, if they have a full 3D Pokemon that comes out and it actually has a lot of promising new features that actually pushes the kind of series forward, even more so than Sun and Moon, hell yeah. That'll definitely be a console seller. And unfortunately, they didn't already have it, and a lot of people were saying, oh, it's not going to be out this year, which means that Switch isn't going to sell all that well this year. Switch is selling amazingly. So anybody that's saying that hasn't really been looking at the numbers. I don't understand why, because the Switch really doesn't have much going for it, but at the same time, yeah, people were going through that. They announced some DLC sort of stuff as well, but they also announced that a Samus Returns is coming out, which is basically a remake, or a repolishing, of the second Metroid game that came out on the SNES and Game Boy, I think? I'm not 100% sure. Game Boy Color, right? Game Boy Advance? I don't remember. Oh my god, it's been so long. But regardless, yeah, it's a remake of the second game, which is probably explaining even more so why they were so quick to shut down the fan-made one, which basically there's a fan-made Samus 2 game, which I still haven't played, and it is still available on the internet, but they basically got DMCA'd immediately as soon as they announced it. And so, yeah, the entire game is playable. It's all complete. They didn't announce it until basically it was done, and they realized that Nintendo was going to definitely jump on it. But this actually plays into that. So basically they're like, hey, either they saw that and they're like, oh, people want this. Let's do it and make money off of it after we screwed over these fans, because that's what Nintendo does. But regardless, they either saw that, or they were already working on it and they're like, oh, these guys are going to take away sales. Realistically, they're not. Nintendo's just a bunch of idiots. But hey, that's my personal opinion. A lot of people will disagree with me on that. But hey, there we go. So that's a lot of kind of talking about that. Yeah, I'm sure I'm not really excited for it, to be honest. Don't really care. It's sure. The old Metroids are fun. I can just go back and get the classic experience. Sure, a remake is going to be nice. It's going to be on the 3DS, which means I can actually play it because I have a 3DS. But at the same time, don't really care all that much. It's not going to be a console seller. It's not something that's going to push me towards nostalgia. Once again, not a huge Nintendo fan, and so maybe that's why. But a lot of people are excited for it. So yeah, kudos to you. It's going to be coming. So yeah, that's exciting because basically Nintendo is remaking games rather than just re-releasing them on their virtual console. So that's exciting. And I think that pretty much wraps up everything that I saw that was sort of interesting. There was a lot of different game announcements. A lot of people think Anthem looks interesting, which, sure, they did a really crappy trailer that had non-live commentary that was very, very obviously non-live commentary. And I'm like, I don't care. So yeah, their trailer kind of killed it for me. There was other sort of games. What else did they announce? I don't know. There's a lot of games that got announced. There was also some back announcements that were in interviews and things like that. And so basically a lot of JRPGs have been getting announced that are coming to PC as well. The PCGamer show talked a lot about a lot of these console exclusives coming to PC, and they talked a lot about sort of performance and stuff like that of Destiny 2 and stuff like that. So if you're excited for Destiny 2, it's going to be coming to PC. It's also going to be a month and a half after the console release currently. And so basically we won't get it on PC for a little while. And I assume that's going to be because they have some kind of tie-ins with Sony, and I have a feeling it's going to be somewhat because of that. They also have some problems with Destiny 2 that's going to be locked at 30 FPS on the Xbox One X, which they announced, which seems dumb. I don't know if that's because of hardware limitation or once again because they're trying to do the whole parity thing, which is definitely a possibility. But for the most part, the C3 show was definitely about the kind of game releases, and I think that was really, really exciting, and I'm excited to see where this stuff kind of goes into in the future. And I apologize for this video being so long, but regardless, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this one. Actually, I don't do this very often. Normally, I do short-term discussion and longer reviews. My reviews are fairly long, actually, so I can't say I don't always do long videos, but regardless, if you're here still watching, thank you so much for watching, because I know I've just been rambling and I've kind of been a little bit off key on a lot of my points because this is a lot to remember. Normally I have 1 or 2 points that I have to talk about, and I'm very easily able to just kind of do it off script. This one, I have a small note list sitting in front of me that's like, this is what I want to talk about, and I'm making sure that I didn't miss anything on it. Oh yeah, Nintendo has a new amiibos, so if you want to spam money at them, there you go. Somebody tried arguing with me that amiibos did not count as microtransactions, even though they add microtransaction features to games. Yeah, that's interesting discussion. I'll do that for another video, though. I won't add it to the end of this one. But yeah, anyways, the game in the background has been Phantasy Star Universe, which I mentioned quite a while ago, I believe. It used to be an MMO. They shut it down. I'm playing single player because it's a nostalgic game for me. I spent hundreds of thousands of hours in this game. Not really, but thousands of hours in this game. I enjoy it a lot. It's got a lot of nice classical elements, but you can't buy it anymore, so there you go. I guess you can find it at like a retro PC shop. It still runs fairly well. I use a widescreen hack for it on PC, or not really a widescreen hack. It already supported widescreen, but I use a resolution hack, which breaks the map and everything, so the map is kind of off. I can't see where I am on it, but I can still zoom around and see. Oh, I guess I can see where I am on it. It kills the minimap, though. The minimap is broken. I actually modded it so that it doesn't have a minimap anymore because it breaks the minimap. But I guess the map actually works sometimes. I don't know. It breaks some things because it's resolution based. Regardless, off topic. Yeah, it's a fun little game. I enjoyed playing it, and I kind of miss it a lot. I wish the private servers would ended up coming to fruition because having the full content that was online and stuff like that would have been great. Anyways, leave your comments below on what I ended up missing from E3 that you think was important. If I missed a topic that you want me to cover in a future video, make sure to leave it down there as well. And if you want more information on certain things, make sure to end up seeking that out. I will try and link those interviews below if I end up remembering. I do have to render this overnight, and so basically I'm headed to bed after this. So I might end up forgetting by the morning. So if I do that, I apologize. I will try and remember and try and have those interviews down there. I'm going to try and link the one with Phil Spencer from Eurogamer, which had mostly pretty much everything I ended up talking about with everyone. PCGamer is supposed to be having another one as well. I didn't read the whole thing. And then they also have an interview with Ancel, which I hope is how you end up pronouncing his name, for Beyond Good and Evil 2, which has some more information about it, and that was on PCGamer, I believe. So basically, those were 2 sources that I ended up going to. Obviously, I checked more, but basically everyone's kind of repeating the horn, and so if you don't want to end up trying repeating the horn on that sort of stuff, don't bother searching. I think this is what was relevant from this show. If you're interested in game releases, do end up checking out other people's lists, because there were quite a few games that I did not mention that ended up getting announced. But this was basically my thoughts. E3, not too bad this year. It was all right. We didn't get enough key announcements or anything like that. It was a lot of kind of off-key announcements that were just kind of like, yeah, we may as well announce this, and so they did. A lot of it didn't really excite me because I'm not a console gamer. That's always been an E3 thing. The PCGamer show was basically guys being like, yeah, this game's still coming to PC. It's going to have 60 FPS. And I'm like, cool. It better have 60 FPS, at least. If it doesn't have 120 FPS, I'm still going to be mad at you. So, yeah, it's just one of those things to where, yeah, it's just kind of a boring E3. It's whatever. And I think Microsoft won it just because they're being uncompetitive, which is very, very interesting in the long term. And their interviews have been fantastic with Phil Spencer and others for their game divisions. And so, yeah, that's exciting. And I think that Microsoft's direction is really, really important. And I'm definitely going to do an entire video just based off of that, because if they end up pushing forward to that, it's going to be really, really interesting. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, make sure to comment and your thoughts on the E3 show, because I can't cover everything because I am one human being and I don't have the time to watch through every single conference. So there's definitely stuff that I did end up missing. So make sure to check out other people's coverage if they have specific topics, or just keep your eye on the news, because definitely news sites and news sort of outlets on YouTube are definitely going to be covering a lot of stuff in the future, especially when it comes down to these interviews that are going to be happening over the next week or so because of E3, especially with all the hype that's going around. So yeah, look forward to that. And I'll see you guys in the next video. For anybody that played this game, oh my god, I found rappers! Helper nostalgia! No!